A majestic bull known for its strength and serenity surprises everyone by ignoring its owner and bowing before a young woman in a wheelchair. What unites them is a secret no one would ever have imagined. The morning sun was already punishing the vast green pasture of Hope Ranch when John Mitchell, at 58, proudly surveyed his empire. From the veranda of the main house, he sipped his coffee while contemplating the horizon dotted with hundreds of cattle. His eyes, however, searched for one particular silhouette, that of Thunder, his prize-winning bull, a rare specimen with black coat and majestic bearing. "Today's the big day, Edward," John commented to his foreman, a trusted man who had been with him for more than 2 decades. "The Texas Livestock Show will be the perfect stage to show America what a true champion looks like." Edward nodded, observing his boss with contained admiration. "Thunder is ready, boss. I've never seen such an impressive animal in my entire life." John smiled, satisfied. That bull represented the culmination of years of hard work and shrewd investments. It was more than a prize-winning animal. It was the living symbol of his social ascent, the transformation from a simple farmer's son into one of the most powerful men in American agribusiness. Hours later, the arena at the livestock exhibition was buzzing. Businessmen, breeders, and curious onlookers occupied every available space. In the main box, John received congratulations and business proposals that he dismissed with a polite smile. His attention was focused on the moment when Thunder would enter the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the presenter with an enthusiastic voice, "prepare yourselves to meet the pride of Hope Ranch, the incomparable Bull Thunder." The crowd applauded as the side doors opened. The immense black bull advanced with firm and controlled steps, led by experienced handlers. John straightened in his chair, chest swelling with pride. It was always like this. Wherever Thunder was presented, he caused an immediate, almost hypnotic impression. That's when the unthinkable happened. Halfway through, Thunder simply stopped. The handlers discreetly pulled on the ropes, but the animal remained motionless, as if transformed into a statue. A murmur ran through the audience. "What's happening?" asked John, suddenly standing up. Thunder, always so obedient and predictable, fixed his gaze on a specific point in the stands. The audience, intrigued, followed the direction of his gaze. Seated in the front row, a young woman of approximately 25 years in a wheelchair returned the animal's gaze with equal intensity. Caroline Sanders hadn't planned to be there. She had come at the invitation of a friend who insisted she should see the famous bull that was revolutionizing bovine genetics in the country. As a freelance journalist specializing in stories from rural America, she had accepted more out of obligation than interest. She never imagined that, upon seeing that imposing animal, she would feel an immediate and inexplicable connection. To everyone's amazement, Thunder began to move again, not following the marked path, but directly toward Caroline. The handlers tried to contain him without success. The public, confused, didn't know whether they should panic or continue observing this unusual scene. "Hold that animal!" shouted the event organizer, but it was too late. Thunder stopped a few meters from Caroline. For a moment that seemed eternal. Animal and woman observed each other in silence. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the immense bull lowered his head in a kind of reverence. Caroline, moved by an impulse that even she didn't understand, extended her hand and touched the animal's muzzle. A solitary tear ran down the young woman's face. In her mind, fragments of memory began to emerge. A green pasture, a child's laughter, a tall man in a straw hat smiling at her. "Daddy," she whispered, so softly that no one could hear. John Mitchell observed the scene with a mixture of perplexity and discomfort. That behavior was totally unexpected, and worse, was beginning to awaken an uneasiness within him, a sensation that something important was about to come to light. "Find out who that young woman is," he ordered Edward in a low voice, "immediately. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue." The video of the encounter between Caroline and Thunder went viral on social media within hours. "Bull recognizes young woman in wheelchair at event" became a headline on various news portals. accompanied by theories about the supposed emotional intelligence of animals. For the public, it was just a touching story. For Caroline and John, it was the beginning of a painful awakening. Caroline returned to the small apartment she shared with her friend Lisa in Riverdale, still processing what had happened. Sitting in front of her laptop, she repeatedly watched the video of the encounter, feeling that every second of that recording carried a meaning she couldn't completely decipher. "You need to see the comments," said Lisa, excited. "Everyone is enchanted. There are people wanting to interview you." But Caroline barely heard. Her hands trembled as she opened a dusty box that held the few memories she had of her father, Anthony Sanders. She leafed through old photographs until she found what she was looking for, a faded image where a young, smiling Anthony caressed a black calf. "It's him," she murmured, tracing the outline of the animal with her fingertips. "It can't be a coincidence." In the mansion at Hope Ranch, John also couldn't find peace. The reports about Caroline arrived quickly. Daughter of Anthony Sanders, former employee of the ranch, disabled at age 8 in the same accident that claimed her father's life. Anthony had been one of his first employees, responsible for the calf-raising sector. "It's all in the archives, boss," informed Edward, handing over a folder. "Anthony worked here when the incident happened. The girl and her mother left soon after." John leafed through the documents with growing uneasiness. There was something that didn't fit, gaps he had filled with half-truths over the years. He vaguely remembered the employee and the accident, a tragedy involving a tractor. At the Sanheim, he was so focused on expanding the business that he had delegated all management of the case to the company's lawyers. "And what about the bull?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Edward hesitated. "Thunder was bought from a small breeder. 3 months after the accident, the official records are in order." John dismissed the foreman with a gesture and poured himself a generous shot of whiskey. Something in his conscience was troubling him, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. He went to his office and unlocked a rarely opened drawer. At the bottom was a folder marked Acquired Properties 2004. Among the pages of contracts and deeds, he found a yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, never sent, addressed to a lawyer. The shaky handwriting belonged to Anthony Sanders. John felt his heart race as he read the first line. "If something happens to me, I want you to know it was because of the black bull and what I discovered about its true origin." Meanwhile, at the local newspaper office where she had secured temporary work, Caroline was interviewing former employees from the region. Her search for answers led her to Sebastian, an almost 80-year-old man who had known her father. "Anthony was a man of integrity," affirmed Sebastian, with eyes misted by nostalgia. "He had a gift with animals, especially with that calf he saved." "Saved?" questioned Caroline, leaning forward. "Yes, miss. That animal was born during a terrible storm. The mother didn't make it, and everyone thought the calf would also pass. But your father didn't give up, spent days and nights caring for him." The old man smiled at the memory. "He called the creature Thunder because of the storm." Caroline felt the air escape from her lungs. What happened afterward? Sebastian furrowed his brow as if trying to rescue a blurred memory. "Your father said that calf would be special, that it had rare characteristics. He began to keep a detailed record. Studies on genetics that I don't even know where he learned from." The old man paused, uncomfortable. "Shortly before the accident, he seemed worried, said they were trying to take the calf from him." Back at the apartment, Caroline browsed through old digitized archives of local newspapers. A small announcement caught her attention. Livestock Genetic Innovation Award granted to John Mitchell for pioneering studies on climate adaptability in beef cattle. The date of the announcement, exactly 3 months after her father's accident. That same night, as the full moon illuminated the pasture of Hope Ranch, Thunder emitted restless bellows. For the first time in years, the bull refused to enter the special stable that John had ordered, built exclusively for him. Instead, he remained at the property's boundary, staring fixedly at the horizon as if waiting for someone who had left long ago. Caroline's decision wasn't impulsive, but the result of sleepless nights revisiting memories and documents. The next morning she headed to Hope Ranch. She hadn't scheduled a visit, counting only on the curiosity that her presence would certainly arouse. The security guard at the main gate hesitated upon seeing her, recognizing her from the video circulating on social media. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Mitchell," she announced with a confidence she didn't feel. "Tell him Caroline Sanders is here." While waiting at the entrance, she observed the luxurious property. The main house in modernized colonial style, the award-winning stables, the private landing strip for small aircraft. It was a completely different world from the small, suburban apartment where she had grown up with her mother after her father's death. John was in a meeting with investors when he received news of Caroline's presence. His first instinct was to refuse to see her, but curiosity and a certain feeling of guilt he couldn't name spoke louder. "Ask her to wait in the office," he ordered, dismissing the businessman with hurried excuses. On fire. The way to the office, he stopped in front of the special stable where Thunder was now confined. The animal, normally calm, had been showing unusual agitation since the event at the exhibition. "He only calmed down a little while ago," commented the handler. "I've never seen him like this, boss." John nodded, thoughtful, and continued on, his way. Upon entering the office, he found Caroline attentively observing a photograph on the wall, John being decorated by the president for the progress he had brought to American agribusiness. "Miss Sanders," he greeted formally, extending his hand. "To what do I owe your visit?" Caroline turned, facing him directly. Years of investigative journalism had taught her to read between the lines, to perceive when someone was hiding something. John Mitchell, despite his impeccable posture, exhibited subtle signs of discomfort. "I came to talk about Thunder," she replied simply, "and about my father, Anthony Sanders." A heavy silence filled the environment. John indicated a chair and sat down across from her, not behind the imposing mahogany desk as he would with other visitors. "I'm sorry about what happened to your father. It was a tragedy that marked all of us." Caroline observed him attentively. "Were you present when it happened?" John looked away for a second. "I was on a business trip. When I returned, it had already occurred." "Curious," commented Caroline, removing a folder from her bag. "I found records that you were on the ranch that day. You signed the authorization for the transport of the tractor that ended up causing the accident." John adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "There are many documents, Miss Sanders. My signature appears on hundreds of them daily. Just as it appears on the purchase record of a black calf 3 months after the accident." Caroline placed a copy of the document on the table. "An animal that coincidentally looks very much like the calf my father was personally raising." The tension grew in the room. John stood up, serving 2 glasses of water. He needed to buy time to organize his thoughts. Caroline's revelations were bringing to the surface memories he had deliberately buried. "What exactly are you suggesting, miss?" Caroline accepted the glass but didn't drink. "I still don't know, but I find it strange that my father, a simple ranch hand, maintained detailed notes on bovine genetics that were rare for the time, notes that disappeared after his death. And stranger still that you received an award for genetic studies shortly afterward." John felt his face burn. Part of him wanted to end that conversation, send that impertinent young woman away from his property. But something prevented him, perhaps remorse, perhaps fear of what she might have already discovered. "Your father was a man ahead of his time," he finally conceded. "He had intuitions about animal breeding that I, with all my academic training, took time to understand." A small admission, but significant. Caroline observed the subtle change in John's body language, shoulders more relaxed, as if he had just put down a small weight. "I'd like to see Thunder," she asked, surprising. John with the change of subject. "I don't think that's appropriate. After what happened at the exhibition." "That's exactly why I need to see him," insisted Caroline. "There's a connection I can't explain, something that goes beyond coincidences." While they were discussing, they heard a commotion coming from outside. An employee hurriedly entered the office. "Boss, it's Thunder. He broke the stable door." John stood up alarmed. "How is that possible? That door was specially reinforced." "He's coming here, sir. interrupted the employee, breathless. To the main house. Caroline felt a shiver run down her spine. Without waiting for permission, she directed her wheelchair out of the office, followed by John. On the house's veranda, they could see the imposing black bull slowly advancing along the main path. Ignoring the handlers who tried to contain him, "He knows I'm here," murmured Caroline more to herself than to John. The businessman observed, astonished, as the animal that represented his greatest pride, and, he now realized, his greatest secret, advanced determinedly toward the daughter of the man he had betrayed years ago. The encounter between Caroline and Thunder at Hope Ranch was even more impressive than the first. Under the astonished gaze of John and the employees, the immense black bull approached the young woman with a gentleness that contrasted with his recent fury in breaking the stable door. Caroline extended her hand, and the animal lowered his head, allowing her touch. "Impossible," murmured John, observing the scene from a few meters away. "Not even I can get that close to him." "Perhaps because he knows who I really am," replied Caroline, without taking her eyes off the animal, "and who you really are." The veiled accusation hung in the air like a charged cloud. John swallowed hard, realizing that he could no longer postpone the inevitable. His reputation, his empire, everything was at stake now. "Let's talk in private," he proposed, indicating the way back to the office. Caroline hesitated. "I prefer it to be here in the open air, in Thunder's presence." John nodded, resigned. With a gesture, he dismissed the employees who were curiously observing the unusual scene. When they found themselves alone, except for the presence of the bull that was now grazing peacefully near Caroline's wheelchair, he began to speak. "I met your father in 1998 when I bought this ranch. It was just a modest property at the time, nothing compared to what it is today." John spoke with a lost gaze, as if revisiting the past. "Anthony was the only employee I kept from the previous administration. He had a knowledge about cattle that seemed intuitive." Caroline listened attentively, distractedly caressing Thunder's muzzle that had approached again. "In 2004, we were facing a crisis in the sector. We needed innovation to survive." John paused, visibly uncomfortable. "That's when I realized that your father was keeping detailed records on a personal project, the development of a line of bulls with unique characteristics of adaptability and resistance. A project in which Thunder was included, completed." "Caroline." John nodded. Anthony had saved a premature calf during a storm. Inexplicably, the animal not only survived, but demonstrated exceptional genetic characteristics. Your father was documenting everything, creating a reproduction methodology. That could revolutionize the market. Caroline felt tears forming. Fragments of childhood memory began to make sense. Her father spending nights in the barn, notebooks full of notes scattered around the small house where they lived, whispered conversations between her parents. "You stole his work," she accused with a choked voice. John didn't respond immediately. He walked a few steps, as if he needed space to organize his thoughts, or perhaps his lies. "I offered to buy the project and the calf. Your father refused." John took a deep breath before continuing. "He believed that knowledge should benefit small producers, not large corporations. We came to argue heatedly. And then there was the accident." Caroline highlighted the last word with bitterness. John turned to face her. "It wasn't planned, if that's what you're suggesting." There was sincerity in his voice, but also guilt. "It occurred during a day of heavy rain. Anthony was operating a tractor in a steep area, something he had done hundreds of times. No one knows exactly how it happened. And coincidentally, his records and notes disappeared," Caroline added, with a voice loaded with distrust. "They didn't disappear," admitted John, surprising Caroline. "They're kept in my safe, along with a proof of bank transfer to your mother's account, a generous compensation for the accident with the condition that you leave the ranch and the region." Caroline felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "My mother never mentioned any compensation." "Because she never accepted the money," replied John with a heavy sigh. "She said she wouldn't sell her silence nor her daughter's future. She just took you and left." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the soft sound of the wind in the foliage. Caroline processed each new piece of information, reconstructing her family's history piece by piece. After you left, I patented the methodology developed by your father. John continued, his voice now almost a whisper. It was the beginning of my true fortune. Thunder became the pillar of the new lineage we created, yielding millions in assisted reproduction and sale of semen to breeders worldwide. A fortune built on a lie, concluded Caroline, on the stolen work of a man who dedicated his life to it. John couldn't sustain Caroline's accusing gaze. I tried to find you afterward, when my name was already established, when money was no longer an issue. I wanted to compensate in some way. But you didn't find us, completed Caroline, because my mother changed our surnames. She feared for our lives. A new silence established itself between them. Thunder, as if sensing the tension, approached Caroline again, offering silent support. And now? John finally asked. What do you intend to do with this information? Caroline observed the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues. 17 years of unanswered questions finally began to make sense, but there were still gaps, still pain. I want the complete truth, she finally answered. All the records, all my father's notes, and I want the world to know who really created this award-winning lineage. John pondered for a moment. He was cornered, but still had cards to play. I can give you all that, and more. Public recognition, profit-sharing, your father's name eternalized in the history of American agribusiness. He made a strategic pause. But there's something I haven't mentioned yet. Something that might change everything you believe you know. Caroline narrowed her eyes, distrustful. And what would that be? Your father wasn't alone in this project, replied John, carefully observing Caroline's reaction. There was a partner, someone who secretly financed his research, someone powerful who became furious when he learned that I had acquired the project. Who? Asked Caroline, feeling a chill down her spine. Richard Alvarez, replied John, pronouncing the name as if it were dangerous just to say it. One of the most influential men in the country, and the one truly responsible for what happened to your father. The mention of Richard Alvarez left Caroline visibly shaken. That name wasn't strange to her. It constantly appeared in headlines. As one of the biggest businessmen in American agribusiness, owner of an empire that rivaled John Mitchell's. You're trying to shift the blame, she accused, recovering from the initial shock. Create a common enemy so I'll forget what you did. John slowly shook his head. I wish it were that simple, but the truth rarely is. He pointed to Thunder, who remained surprisingly close. Why do you think I keep this bull with such care? It's not just for the economic value. It's because as long as he's under my guard, Alvarez can't complete the genetic puzzle your father initiated. Caroline studied John's expression, looking for signs of manipulation. Years of investigative journalism had taught her to detect lies, but what she saw in the rancher's face was a mixture of genuine guilt and fear. Explain yourself better, she demanded, crossing her arms. John took a deep breath, like someone preparing for a painful confession. Your father discovered a rare genetic marker in Thunder, something that allowed the animal to develop extraordinary resistance to common diseases in American cattle. He began to document everything, planning a breeding program that would revolutionize national livestock. And how does Alvarez enter this story? He was the one who initially financed the research secretly. Anthony worked for me during the day, but at night, he developed the project for Alvarez. John paused. When I discovered your father's notes, I saw a unique opportunity there. I offered to buy the project, as I said before. Anthony's refusal led me to a questionable decision. Stealing his work, completed Caroline bitterly. Acquiring without authorization, corrected John, as if semantics could lighten the weight of his actions. But I didn't count on Alvarez's reaction when he found out. He sought me out, furious, demanding the calf and the notes. He offered a fortune, then threatened. I refused both approaches. Caroline processed each new piece of information, trying to separate truths from possible manipulations. And my father's accident? John visibly hesitated. 3 days before, Anthony came to see me agitated. He said he had discovered something disturbing about Alvarez. that he planned to use the discovery to create a monopoly in the sector, patenting the technique and preventing small producers from accessing it. Your father wanted my help to expose the scheme. And naturally you offered to help, commented Caroline sarcastically. Actually, I asked for time. I was scared of the implications of Alvarez's power. The shame was palpable in John's voice. The next day, the accident occurred. I could never prove it, but I always believed it was Alvarez's doing. Caroline felt a lump in her throat. The possibility that her father's story was even more complex and tragic than she had imagined left her stunned. She looked at Thunder, who remained calm by her side like a silent guardian. If what you say is true, why did you never denounce Alvarez? John let out a humorless laugh. With what evidence? All the evidence I had was your father's notes, the same ones I had, illegally acquired. Besides, Alvarez has powerful connections, people in strategic positions throughout the country. It would be my word against his, and we know who would lose. A heavy silence settled between them. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pasture. Caroline observed the property, thinking about how her life could have been different if her father were alive, if they had never left there. And now, continued John, interrupting her thoughts, Alvarez is back. He learned of the incident at the exhibition, saw the images of you with Thunder. He contacted me yesterday demanding a meeting. He knows who I am? Apparently, yes, and that deeply concerns me. John sat on a nearby bench, suddenly looking aged and tired. Caroline, regardless of what you think of me, and you have every right to despise me, you must believe me when I say that. Alvarez is dangerous. What your father discovered is potentially worth billions, and he won't hesitate to eliminate any obstacle. Caroline processed the information. Part of her still doubted John, but her journalistic instinct told her there was truth in his words. I need to see my father's documents, all the notes, all the records. John nodded. They're in the safe. But I must warn you, once you have access to this information, you'll also become a target. I've been a target since the moment I was born, replied Caroline bitterly. I just didn't know it until now. As they talked, one of the security guards approached hurriedly. Mr. Mitchell, there's an unidentified car approaching from the west access. Dad didn't respond to contact attempts over the radio. John stood up abruptly, his face pale. Take Miss Sanders to the office immediately, lock the doors, and don't open for anyone but me. What's happening? Asked Caroline, alarmed. The west. Access is a secondary road known to very few people. John signaled for the security guard to help Caroline. Alvarez is coming, and apparently he didn't wait for an invitation. As she was quickly led to the interior of the house, Caroline cast a last glance at Thunder. To her surprise, the animal showed no agitation. On the contrary, he was attentively observing the direction indicated by the security guard, as if also expecting the arrival of an unwanted visitor. At that moment, Caroline realized she was about to form an unlikely alliance with the man who had exploited her father's work. Against her will, John Mitchell had become her only ally against a potentially much greater threat. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. John. Mitchell's office, with its walls covered in dark wood and trophies from livestock exhibitions, seemed to Caroline like an improvised fortress. Through the window, she observed the movement of security guards strategically positioning themselves around the perimeter of the main house. The tension was palpable. Here, said John, handing her a worn leather folder. These are your father's original notes. I kept everything exactly as I found it. Caroline opened the folder with trembling hands. The familiar handwriting brought a lump to her throat, letters slightly inclined to the right, the T's always crossed with force, as her mother used to describe. There were pages and pages of meticulous notes, formulas, detailed drawings of genetic sequences, daily observations about Thunder. He was a genius, she murmured, impressed with the complexity of the work. He never had formal education in genetics. How did he manage? Your father had a natural intuition, something you don't learn in universities, replied John, observing through the window. I realized that in the first months he worked for me. He had an understanding about animals that seemed almost supernatural. Caroline continued leafing through the documents until she came across a photograph. In it, her father, much younger than in her memories, smiled beside a newborn black calf. On the back, a simple note: Thunder, born during the biggest storm of the year, survivor against all odds. He really loved this animal, she commented, caressing the photograph. John nodded. More than that, he believed Thunder was special, that he represented a unique opportunity for small producers. His natural resistance to diseases could be reproduced, creating stronger lineages and reducing dependence on antibiotics and other expensive treatments. He paused. It was a revolutionary vision. That you stole for your own benefit, accused Caroline, unable to contain the bitterness. That I confiscated and partially implemented, corrected John. There's something you still don't understand. What your father discovered was much more valuable and dangerous than it appears at first glance. Before he could elaborate, they were interrupted by urgent knocks on the door. Edward, the foreman, entered hurriedly. Boss, he's arrived, and he's demanding to see the bull immediately. John took a deep breath, adjusting his belt in a nervous gesture. How much time have we gained? Maybe 10 minutes. The security guards are trying to delay him politely, but he brought an entourage. 4 men, all armed. Caroline felt a chill. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. What does he want exactly? John and Edward exchanged meaningful looks before the rancher answered. Alvarez believes there's a final component in your father's research, something that was never formally documented, but that is essential to complete the genetic puzzle. And is there? Asked Caroline. Yes, confirmed John, heading to a painting on the wall. He removed it, revealing a small built-in safe. Your father suspected he was being watched. In the last days before the accident, he became extremely cautious. The most crucial part of his discovery he entrusted to me personally. Caroline observed, astonished, as John opened the safe and removed a small metallic object, an old flash drive, protected by a waterproof case. Here is what Alvarez really wants: the key to everything. From outside they heard the sound of a heated discussion. The voices were rapidly approaching. We don't have much time, continued John, handing the flash drive to Caroline. Your father wanted this to be used for the good of all, not to create monopolies. You're a journalist, you have connections. You can ensure this information reaches the right people. Caroline hesitated. Why do you trust me now? We barely know each other. Because you're Anthony's daughter, he answered simply, and because Thunder chose you. That animal has always known more than any of us. The office door opened abruptly. A tall man, approximately 60 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, entered as if he owned the place. His posture exuded authority and arrogance in equal doses. Behind him, 2 athletic men observed the environment with calculating gazes. John Mitchell, the man greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Always a pleasure to visit your modest property. John remained impassive. Richard, I don't remember scheduling your visit. Richard Alvarez laughed, but the sound was devoid of humor. His eyes, alert like those of a predator, quickly assessed the environment until landing on Caroline. And this must be young Miss Sanders. Alvarez approached, extending his hand. Fascinating how genetics work. You have the same determined eyes as your father. Caroline didn't accept the greeting. The simple fact of being in the presence of that man, who was possibly responsible for the tragedy that had changed her life, made her blood boil. What do you want, Mr. Alvarez? She asked, keeping her voice firm, despite the fear she felt. Straight. To the point, exactly like Anthony. Alvarez smiled again, circling the room like a shark. I'm here to correct a historical error, to recover what belongs to me by right. John subtly positioned himself between Alvarez and Caroline. Nothing here belongs to you, Richard. I suggest you leave before things get complicated. Alvarez ignored the veiled threat. The whole world saw the video from the exhibition, the Bull and young Miss Sanders, a connection that defies rational explanations, or perhaps not. His eyes gleamed with a calculating curiosity. Perhaps it's exactly what Anthony predicted in his final notes. The missing piece in the puzzle. Caroline and John exchanged confused looks. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Your father had a fascinating theory," elaborated Alvarez. "He believed that Thunder's exceptional capacity wasn't just genetic, but also epigenetic, environmental and emotional factors influencing the expression of genes." He moved closer, and he suspected there was a special connection between the animal and you, Miss Sanders, something related to the fact that you were born on the same day. Caroline felt a shiver. It was true, her birthday coincided with Thunder's birth. Her father had always commented on this coincidence, calling them children of the storm. "That's why I'm here," continued Alvarez, "to take you and the bull. Together, you are the key to unlocking the greatest genetic advancement in the history of world livestock." John stepped forward. "You've gone mad. Caroline isn't a scientific experiment, and Thunder isn't for sale." Alvarez's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold expression. "I'm not asking permission, John. I'm informing you how things will be from now on." The two men accompanying him stepped forward, discreetly revealing the weapons under their jackets. At that tense moment, a powerful bellow echoed through the air, followed by sounds of agitation. Edward, who was observing through the window, turned alarmed. "Boss, it's Thunder! He broke the containment again and is coming here." The sound of hooves hitting against the wooden floor of the veranda announced Thunder's imminent arrival. Alvarez and his men exchanged nervous glances, while John and Caroline remained strangely calm. "Seems like he has an opinion on the matter," commented John with a slight smile. The office door, which hadn't been completely closed, was pushed open by the black bull's muzzle. Thunder entered slowly, his dark eyes scanning the room until they fixed on Alvarez. The animal snorted, clearly agitated by the businessman's presence. "Extraordinary," murmured Alvarez, a mixture of fascination and greed in his gaze. "The level of situational awareness is incredible." One of Alvarez's security guards discreetly brought his hand to his holster, but his boss stopped him with a gesture. "Wouldn't be wise," he warned. "An animal of this value cannot be damaged." Caroline observed the scene with a strange sensation. Thunder's presence, which should increase the tension, paradoxically made her feel safer. She slid her hand into her pants pocket, where she had stored the flash drive. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, breaking the tense silence, "I believe we are all aware of the importance of my father's work, but transforming this into a power dispute wasn't what he wanted." "Ah, the naivety of youth," replied Alvarez condescendingly. "Your father was a visionary, but he didn't understand market realities. Some discoveries are too big to be simply shared." Caroline realized it would be futile to appeal to any sense of ethics in that man. She decided to change her strategy. "You mentioned that my father had theories about my connection with Thunder. I'd like to know more about that." The tactic worked. Alvarez's ego made him lower his guard given the opportunity to demonstrate knowledge. "Your father documented something fascinating. During the storm in which Thunder was born, you were at the ranch with him, a 5-year-old girl. While everyone took shelter, you escaped to the barn. They found you asleep next to the newborn calf, both soaked by the rain that entered through the cracks in the roof." Fragments of that memory emerged in Caroline's mind. The deafening noise of the thunder, the initial fear followed by an inexplicable sensation of security beside the small animal. Anthony theorized that this initial contact, under extreme stress conditions, created some kind of epigenetic bond, continued Alvarez. He observed that the calf responded in a unique way to your presence, even years later, and he believed that this connection was a fundamental part of what made Thunder so exceptional. John, who until then had been listening attentively, stepped forward. What Anthony never formally recorded, and what Alvarez is unaware of, is that this theory was proven in subsequent tests. Alvarez narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's official work," John addressed Caroline, "detailed the specific genetic marker that gave Thunder resistance. But in his personal notes, those that were never shared with Alvarez, he documented something even more significant." Caroline felt her heart racing. She was about to discover what her father had really achieved before departing. Anthony realized that the expression of this marker was activated by emotional factors, explained John. Thunder's exceptional resistance wasn't constant. It increased significantly when he was in contact with you. It was a revolutionary discovery that defied everything we knew about animal genetics. Impossible, interrupted Alvarez, although his tone betrayed fascination. This contradicts basic principles of modern genetics. And yet it's true, countered John. I conducted the same tests after acquiring the notes. The results were consistent. Thunder's blood presents measurable alterations in gene expression in the presence of Caroline, or even objects with her scent. Caroline processed these revelations with amazement. This explained why Thunder had recognized her immediately at the exhibition after so many years of separation. That's why. I was never able to fully reproduce Thunder's success with other animals, admitted John. The emotional component was missing, the connection he had with you. Alvarez seemed momentarily destabilized by this new information. If this is true, the value of this discovery is incalculable, not just for livestock, but for human medicine, for the fundamental understanding of life itself. His expression changed, becoming harder, and that's exactly why I cannot allow this to fall into public domain. Imagine the chaos, the implications for all industries based on traditional genetics. Caroline perceived the growing danger in the situation. Alvarez was no longer interested only in the commercial value of the discovery. Now he saw a potential threat to his multiple businesses. Enough talk, decided Alvarez, gesturing to his men. Take the girl and the animal. The research facilities are prepared. John positioned himself protectively in front of Caroline. You're not going anywhere with them, Richard. This property is full of security guards loyal to me. How convenient. A confrontation would be, replied Alvarez with a sinister smile. Two agribusiness magnates involved in a tragic incident? The newspapers would love it, and in the end, who would take control of all this? My lawyers have already prepared all the documentation. The confrontation was interrupted by the distant sound of sirens. Edward, who was monitoring the surroundings, entered hurriedly. Boss, the federal police are arriving, several cars. The news caught both John and Alvarez by surprise. You called the authorities? Asked Alvarez, furious. No, replied John, equally confused. All eyes turned to Caroline, who smiled discreetly while caressing Thunder's muzzle. Actually, it was me, she revealed. Or rather, my friend and colleague, Lisa. Before coming here, I configured my cell phone to automatically send all the audio of this conversation to her if I didn't deactivate the system at regular intervals. John looked at her with new admiration. A cautious journalist. More than that, added Caroline, a daughter determined to protect her father's legacy. Alvarez gritted his teeth, visibly out of control. You have no idea who you're dealing with, girl. You think the police can stop me? I have judges, politicians. And I have the truth, interrupted Caroline. The audio of this conversation is already being broadcast live to several journalists. Your confession about trying to kidnap a person and an animal, your threats, everything is being documented. Alvarez's face paled as he realized the trap he had fallen into. His calculating gaze swept the room, frantically evaluating the options left to him. A year passed since the confrontation in John Mitchell's office. Hope Ranch, previously a property focused exclusively on profit, had transformed into something different. At the main entrance, a new sign announced, Anthony Sanders Institute for Sustainable Genetic Research. Caroline observed the movement at the new research center, inaugurated that morning with the presence of scientists, journalists, and small rural producers from all over the country. Outside the main building, a bronze statue of her father, Anthony Sanders, smiled at visitors, not as a monument to vanity, but as a symbol of resilience and vision. Your father would be proud, commented John, approaching in his motorized wheelchair. The businessman had suffered a mild heart attack after the events of that turbulent day, a warning that made him reevaluate many of his priorities. Especially of how everything was resolved, agreed Caroline, without vengeance, without destruction, just the truth coming to light. The revelation of Anthony Sanders' pioneering work had caused the expected impact in the agricultural sector. The scandal involving Richard Alvarez currently facing charges for attempted kidnapping, extortion, and involvement in Anthony's death, had shaken power structures that seemed unshakable. "The preliminary results of the new tests are promising," commented John, indicating the tablet in his lap. "The team has managed to isolate the specific genetic marker identified by your father and is developing a method to activate it without needing the same emotional connection that Thunder has with you," Caroline smiled, democratizing access to the technology exactly as he wanted. Together, they observed Thunder peacefully grazing in the special field built near the Institute, where visitors could observe him from a distance. The bull, now 8 years old, was at the peak of his physical formation. His DNA had become the basis for a genetic improvement program that would primarily benefit small producers. "The story about Alvarez having sent your father to that accident, do you believe it?" asked Caroline after a few moments of silence. John sighed deeply. The federal police investigations confirmed that he had men infiltrated here on the ranch, and the coincidence of the tractor brakes failing precisely when your father was threatening to expose his plans. He paused. "I believe so, but we'll never know with absolute certainty." Caroline nodded. She had learned to live with the uncertainty about the exact details of what had happened to her father. The important thing was that his legacy was now protected and prospering. "The partnership is working well," commented John, changing the subject. "Your journalistic part, disseminating the knowledge, combined with my structure and contacts, your father would have approved." The unusual partnership between Caroline and John had surprised many. After the events of that day, John had proposed a partnership. He would provide the capital and structure to create a research institute based on Anthony's discoveries, with the condition that Caroline would have equal decision-making power and that the technology would be accessible to producers of all sizes. "I still wonder why you changed your mind," commented Caroline. "Why you decided to share something you could have kept exclusively for yourself." John smiled melancholically. "Maybe I was tired of carrying the weight of this secret, or maybe—" he looked at Anthony's statue. "Maybe your father continued to haunt me in some way." Lisa, now editor-in-chief of the newspaper where Caroline worked, approached excitedly. "The UN representatives have arrived. They're fascinated with the implications of the work for global food security." Caroline smiled. The research initiated by her father, now expanded by an international team, promised to revolutionize not only livestock, but potentially aspects of human medicine. The discovery that emotional factors could alter genetic expression opened entirely new paths for science. "There's something I never told you," said John when Lisa moved away. "Something I found in your father's personal notes." Caroline turned her attention to him, intrigued. "In the last days before the accident, he wrote about a recurring dream. He dreamed that you, still a child, were in an open field with Thunder, already an adult, and somehow in the dream he knew he would no longer be present, but that you two would be connected, protecting his legacy." Silent tears ran down Caroline's face. "He always said that dreams are sometimes ways for our subconscious to organize what we already know, but haven't yet admitted. Or perhaps," added John, "they are sometimes glimpses of what is to come." A familiar bellow interrupted the conversation. Thunder, who normally kept his distance from visitors, was slowly approaching the fence, his dark, deep eyes fixed on Caroline as they always did when she was nearby. "I think he's calling you," commented John. Caroline smiled, wiping away the tears. "He always knew, didn't he? From the beginning he knew who I was, what had happened." "Animals have forms of understanding that we are still far from completely comprehending," replied John, "especially this one." Caroline directed her wheelchair to the fence, extending her hand to caress the imposing animal's muzzle. As always happened, she felt a strange current of energy running through her body at the moment of contact. "Thank you for bringing me back home," she whispered to the bull. Thunder snorted softly, as if he understood. In the gentle breeze of that afternoon, Caroline could almost feel her father's presence, finally at peace, seeing his work and vision being continued. The circle was complete. What had begun as a search for justice had transformed into a rebirth. not just of Anthony Sanders' scientific legacy, but of the connection between his daughter and the extraordinary animal that, against all odds, had found their way back to each other, bringing with them a silent revolution that would benefit future generations.